The Pentagon is gathering air power for a massive attack on Iran, possibly with the intent of regime change. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is moving toward the Middle East. Patriot and THAAD air defense systems are being deployed. Non-essential US personnel and equipment are being pulled back from exposed regional bases, and over 3 dozen US tanker aircraft and heavy lift transporters are heading there. The planning phase is now giving way to execution. Iran, meanwhile, is not sitting idly by. Russian and Chinese cargo aircraft have been making rounds into the country, almost certainly carrying arms and ammunition. Since mid-2025, Tehran has been stockpiling arms, specifically Chinese weapons. On paper, Iran now fields top-notch air defenses, including HQ-9B missiles. In practice, however, that advantage is brittle. Air defense systems only work efficiently when layered and integrated with other systems. Iran doesn't have that. However one looks at it, the fuse is now burning. The Pentagon is just waiting for the perfect time. Attack too soon and Iranians will rally around the flag. Attack too late and the US will miss the momentum. Half measures won't do. This is the hinge on which decades turn, and what happens next will outlive everyone in the room. Conflicts between states don't just play out on battlefields anymore, they also take place online through cyber attacks, surveillance, and digital disruptions. The internet essentially becomes part of the conflict itself. And for ordinary people trying to follow events as they develop, simply being online can expose far more data than intended. That's where NordVPN comes in. It encrypts your internet traffic, protects your location, and helps shield your data from prying eyes. Features like Threat Protection Pro block malware, trackers, and malicious websites before they load, while Dark Web Monitor alerts you if your personal information ever appears in data leaks or underground markets. If you want a safer way to browse, go to nordvpn.com/CaspianReport or use the link in the description. It comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you don't find it very useful, you can just get your money back. Clicking that link helps support this channel, but it also gets you an extended subscription. You get the 2-year plan plus 4 extra months. It's a good deal, and again it helps support the channel when you sign up. The link is nordvpn.com/CaspianReport. Give it a try. The deadly protests in Iran continue to rage on, raising the prospects of US military intervention. Internet connectivity has been largely shut down in the country since January 8th, which makes it difficult to ascertain the scale and scope of the situation. Even so, the protests are just a pretext for military action. Iranians in the streets may certainly want democracy, but Trump has no real concern for any of them, because ultimately this isn't about promoting democracy or freedom. Trump's rhetoric on Venezuela, Ukraine, and Greenland shows exactly what he thinks of the liberal, rules-based order. Case in point, the renewed American push to bomb Iran again is not driven by a sudden crisis, least of all the current protests, but by unfinished business from the last showdown. You see, the first US attack on the Iranian nuclear sites was not quite as successful. Around 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium were unaccounted for. The Iranians had secretly relocated these months ago in anticipation of an attack. If further enriched to 90%, which is a relatively easy process, the stockpile could produce enough fissile core for 9 nuclear weapons. And as long as that stockpile remains missing, as long as Iran retains even the slightest ability to build a bomb, the war is unfinished. Diplomats in Tehran have been trying to prevent or at least postpone a US attack by offering to restart negotiations with the Trump administration. If Iran were to offer substantial concessions on its nuclear program and its missile program, it would reduce the risk of US military action. However, America's demands have expanded since the last standoff. They now include not only ending nuclear enrichment and cutting back on missile stockpiles, but also getting rid of the enriched nuclear material they have and stopping support for regional proxy groups. Iran is not going to meet these prerequisites, and so in the coming days and weeks, the risk of an attack on Iran will remain high. At Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, widely regarded as the largest US military base in the region with around 10,000 troops, non-essential aircraft have been moved away. This satellite imagery shows the situation on the ground. The same pullback is seen at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. You don't do this when a diplomatic resolution is around the corner. You clear them when you expect Iranian missiles to hit that base. For instance, Al Udeid sits less than 300 kilometers from Iran, and Shahab-3 missiles can reach it in just 4 minutes. The evacuation of Al Udeid and other bases is a sign that the battlefield is being cleared for a major fight. However, the first and foremost question to ask is not what the Pentagon can do, but what it seeks to achieve. Strategy must precede action. Trump's objective remains largely ambiguous. It ranges from regime change through a coup or popular uprising to pressuring Tehran into a new nuclear agreement. If the objective is to destroy Iran's nuclear sites and eliminate the unaccounted enriched uranium, then the mission calls for B-2 bombers, which are the only aircraft that can carry the GBU-57 bunker busters. If the endgame is regime change, then the scope expands far beyond that. So, in the absence of clearly defined goals, the use of military force risks becoming an end in itself. Fresh off the heels of the US raid on Venezuela, some are now speculating that the US could do a regime change operation by targeting key Iranian leaders. The belief is that doing so would destabilize Iran's political hierarchy and compel remaining elements to submit to American terms. However, an exfiltration mission similar to the operation that captured Maduro in Caracas is unlikely. US helicopters would need to refuel inside Iranian territory due to the distance from friendly airspace and the Persian Gulf. Caracas sits close to the coast, whereas Tehran is tucked far away from the open oceans. In fact, the need for refueling is precisely what led to the failure of Operation Eagle Claw in 1980, which sought to rescue US embassy staff held hostage during the Islamic Revolution. So any overt military action against Iran would most likely take the form of assassination strikes. However, this approach carries inherent risks. For one, Iran is ideologically entrenched, deeply so. Any kinetic attack that kills or removes a figure like the supreme leader or a senior military official would certainly create shock, but it would also play into the Shia Islam martyrdom culture and thereby galvanize unity. What's more, taking out the supreme leader, as much as a symbolic figure he is, wouldn't trigger the government's collapse. Iran's political machine is highly institutionalized, and the IRGC has a contingency plan to move into position and consolidate control over the clerical security elite. Once the IRGC takes power and de facto assumes guardianship of the state, they would then select a new supreme leader. So, assassinating Iran's top leader would only create a short-term crisis while rallying hardliners around the flag and sparking a wider display of nationalism and unity. Another important consideration are the regional parameters. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Qatar, and Kuwait will likely withhold airspace access for an attack on Iran. Understandably, Iranian retaliation would target these countries, and they want no part in that. But at the same time, this restricts America's options to 3 approach vectors. The first corridor is from the north. Flying in from Europe, American B-2 bombers could cross international airspace over the Black Sea and enter Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. None of the Caucasian states is likely to approve, but the US could do it undetected anyway. After hitting their targets, the B-2 bombers could then exit the battle space by following the same route back or by flying south through the Indian Ocean. The problem with this route is that it comes awfully close to Russian airspace, and the Russians may be able to track the B-2 bombers and warn their Iranian counterparts, so it's a risky route. The second corridor is through Israel, Jordan, and Iraq. Most of the US tanker aircraft and heavy lift transporters, over 36 of them, are headed toward Jordan, so this central route is the most likely. Admittedly, the Iraqis will withhold their airspace, but they lack the capacity to detect and track stealth aircraft. By using B-2, F-22 and F-35s, the US could move about this route and strike at Iran undetected. This is also the same route that was used previously to attack Iran's nuclear sites. It's tested, it works, but it's also somewhat predictable. The third corridor is through the Indian Ocean. This one offers the most freedom of movement, but also requires the most logistical prep work. Having the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group in precisely that area certainly helps. This option is also the preferred choice for regional nations because it minimizes their exposure to Iranian retaliatory strikes. What's more, by going through the south, the US could also use conventional bombers such as B-52s, thereby bringing in much more firepower. The weight of evidence suggests that it could be a combination of the central and southern corridors. By the way, this video in no way promotes war. This is a realistic assessment based on cold calculated interests and needs without the huff and puff of morals. This is what the Americans would do because it benefits them. In no shape or form do we advocate for war. Trump may think differently, however. If he presses on and focuses on destroying Iran's nuclear sites, the attack would remain relatively contained. B-2 bombers flying in and out would be enough. However, if the objective expands to regime change, then the operation takes on an entirely different nature. If the United States decides to go for regime change in Iran, it could target IRGC infrastructure, command centers, and paramilitary officials in hopes of weakening the security forces responsible for the crackdown. Doing so would create a brief period of internal disruption and uncertainty, but it wouldn't trigger meaningful negotiations or push Tehran toward collapse. The Iranians would move quickly to restore operational control and replace fallen commanders. That's what they did during the 12-day war in June. During this window of disruption, protesters may take up arms, and clashes with law enforcement could become even more violent, but it still wouldn't be enough to pose an existential threat to the government. Only a wider, sustained campaign targeting Iran's military infrastructure, security apparatus, and political leadership over an extended period of time, think of weeks, if not months, could threaten Tehran's survival. A one-off military strike wouldn't achieve anything, but a sustained campaign that degrades Iran's military capabilities and disrupts its security forces would create a power vacuum within the IRGC. The remaining elements could then be coerced into negotiation and compliance. Iran's response to all this would of course be proportional to the level of damage inflicted. In a low-level escalation, Iran could carry out a telegraphed limited attack, such as striking US diplomatic or military targets in Iraq or harassing commercial or military ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The goal would be to re-establish deterrence while avoiding a wider war. A mid-level response could involve Iran launching similarly telegraphed strikes against US military assets in the Gulf, including those in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and so on. Such a response, however, would instantly raise the risk of regional conflict. Finally, Iran's leadership could go for a high-level escalation. While unlikely, this option could see an unannounced Iranian attack on American or Israeli targets or an attempt to block the Strait of Hormuz. This would most certainly lead to total war, but it would only happen if Tehran truly believed the United States threatened its survival. So there are degrees of escalation, and both America and Iran will try to hold their punches so long as the other does the same. Meanwhile, Israel could join the American attack and go all out, but their core mission will be entirely different. Should the US attack succeed and help topple the government, within an hour of the handover of authority, Israeli jets will attack and obliterate Iran's military infrastructure. So, at the fleeting moment of hope, while Iranians celebrate the revolution and the military command is in disarray, Israeli jets will make short work of Iran's air defenses, missile launchers, drone factories, etc. Israel will take out everything, regardless of whether the new government is friendly or not. Within hours, Iran will lose 2 decades of military buildup. That's what they did in Syria in the aftermath of Assad's exit, and that's what they'll do in Iran. So, Israeli jets will be armed, fueled, and ready for precisely that operational window. This killing blow would not only decimate Iran's military, but also paralyze the new government to such a degree that it would be incapable of mounting a geopolitical comeback. That's the arithmetic of strategy. While conflict produces casualties and exhausts resources, it's often the spectators who inherit the spoils. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you approve of what we do, please leave a comment, hit the like button, and mayhaps share the video. In any case, thank you for your time, and Sawal.